Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Ruby Rogues podcast. I'm your host today, Valentino Stoll, and we're joined by a very special guest today, Weston Ganger. How do you pronounce that?
G-A-N, Ganger. So I usually
Ganger.
say gangster without the ST.
Okay. I was gonna say it's French for winning, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, welcome to the show where we brought you on today. You wrote this kind of awesome project, Rails I18n Manager. For those not familiar with I18n, it's the translation mechanism that Rails takes advantage of. Do you want to talk maybe a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself, what got you started into this and where you're coming from?
Yeah. So I'm just a Ruby developer. I work in other stuff, but Ruby is the passion. I work for Braintree, so we have a Ruby on Rails stack, and they love Ruby there too. So it's a really nice place to work. I like doing open source. It's been a passion of mine since I started a gem back in the day called Spreadsheet Architect, and all I wanted to do was just take tabular data and output it as a CSV or XLSX or ODS, and it should just be simple. I have an array of data, put it out, and so you couldn't do that thing, and so I was like, well, this is weird. What you think you should be able to do, you can't do it. So that started the long haul of, well, let's build open source libraries. Okay, that was fun. I just made the world a better place. What's next? So I got sucked into this whole open source rabbit hole.
That's how it starts, right? You get excited about something, and then you're like, what else can I make?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm pretty happy to continue working with the Ruby language, Ruby community. That seems to be my passion. I'm glad that it's there. It removes a lot of the barriers to coding. You're not caught up in things that don't matter to humans. It's things that do matter to humans when you're working with Ruby, which is I find that to be a joy.
Yeah, I do as well. I have to think a lot less about about the syntax, which I'm not happy to dive back into JavaScript for. So what's your favorite open source project that maybe triggered your itch here?
Externally to me or of my own?
I mean, either, really. What got you curious? Like, you seem to be very passionate about open source. Like, what started that, right? Like,
I think it was creating that gem. Obviously, open source is built into the Rails community, and so I guess you're just like, well, other people are doing it. How can I do that stuff? And actually, I was a contractor when I first started out after getting out of school. So I had my own business, and so not filled up with 100% of the time. You're trying to press in and get better, grow and learn and be more capable in your free time. So basically, I spent some of that time, contributing and doing what I can, building out little projects. Oh, you find something that you can help out with, so create a repository for that. I think that free time I was able to pour a lot of that into open source, and I think that was beneficial to my career and gaining skills as a developer and stuff. So it was, while you're not just scratching an itch just to do stuff, you're building yourself to be better.
Yeah, totally. I feel the same way. I mean, I just remember, what was it? A spree is basically how I came about finding Rails, right? Where I was like, oh, I'm looking for like an open source e-commerce system, like what's out there.
Yep.
And I uncovered that, and then I was just like, wow, like people are just like giving this up for free. And I hear I submitted a, a pull request, I contributed, it's kind of exciting once you like realize like what you're getting into. Right.
Yeah, yeah, it really is. It really is a joy. Yeah, and then you had the Solidus spree split, so that
That's
was
right.
always, something
Not that it,
to dive
not that
deep
there aren't
into.
issues, right?
Yeah,
uh
yeah.
so, so what got you onto the translation route? um what kind of prompted this need for you to be able to manage all your translations?
So we had this, working on a project, and okay, it needs to be translated into other languages. That's the requirement. And you're like, oh yeah, sure. I18, like, uh, why not? It's everybody does it, like this will be easy, like it's standardized. It's just a normal thing. Let's go. Let's do it. So you hop into the I18 thing, thinking, oh, I'll just manage these files and all is well. Well, you get into the workflow and you find out that, okay, that's fine if you're a solo developer and like you remember to translate all your different languages, and there's just so many different pitfalls that you can miss when you're doing translations. And the particular one that started to bother me um, when we were working on this stuff. Okay, so basically, we would just the when you have the file based approach, um, you expect that to just only work at a small scale. Um, if you're just thinking about it, I18 for your first time, and so you might want to reach for the database, what you're used to in Rails. So you say, okay, let's store these translations in the database, where this makes sense, and we can have a UI, and the product folks can manage these translations, and all is well. So as soon as you go to do it on the database level, you now have performance issues. You're loading every little string from the database. There's all this question of caching and a whole headache of things you can get yourself into once you go to the database route. And so I wanted to find a way. Oh, and even with the database route, you end up with drift between development and production. So your development files might say one thing and your production might say something else. And so you're like, well, in development, the strings were all just as the spec intended, and then you get to production. And I think Starbucks had an incident recently where they said "Hello World" to everybody. So it's that sort of thing. Well, it was fine in development, everything was up to snuff. Well, now there's environmental differences, and so you're working with two different copies of the software. And with translations, that could be if you change the translations a bunch, it could be a wildly different experience in your app. Like two totally different experiences. So you want to solve that drift between dev and production. And so if you're using a file-based approach for your translations, then now your translations are tied directly to your repository. They're version controlled. They're directly one-to-one, so it's always the same between development and production. And so you want to have that file-based approach. That's going to lead to a lot less headaches. You don't have to worry about things like um, major caching and all the database performance concerns. It's all just a simple solution. And so I think there's a lot to be said about that, because it's it's a shame to get tripped up on all the logistics just trying to translate your app. There's many other things to focus on.
you know, Again, back to Spree, like that was kind of my first foray into like heavy translation usage, right? Where everything is tied to the database. It's also tied to a very specific business unit, right? Like a product in that case.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it's very easy, like that drift you're talking about, oh, like, well, we didn't have the products that are in production seated. So like, it's going to be different, right? Like, uh,
Yeah.
how do you handle that best, right? It's hard, and I we definitely went back to a file based approach for a lot of the main interface stuff, right? Because it's just so much easier to work with. You get that version control, and if something's not right, you know why, right? What kind of issues do you see having that file based approach? Um, on a larger scale? Like, is there any concerns that from using it on on a larger scale? Like, do you have to think about how you're organizing those files, right? Like, is do you not have as much automation you can do with it because it's split across so many things?
Um, I mean, there are limitations to any approach at scale, but I think the file-based approach is ready to handle a lot of what you're going to need until you reach a point where it should be valuable enough to you to sink time into it. Um, so I I would say don't think about that until you get there,
Yeah.
right? Like that's a problem for later. I think you're gonna have big changes to make probably once you have start to have those issues. So um, maybe you move to a proper service or something, third party service. I don't know what the case might be, but yeah, no. So I think this is more about getting people moving, from a smaller scale. This will get you going and keep you going for a long time.
So what's the workflow look like using this tool? Like, is this for a case like where you're starting from scratch with your translations, or like you already have some? Does it cover all these cases?
Yeah, you could start from scratch, but the idea is that you would have um, existing files, and you want to import them. So you can import those. Uh, Basically, we provide a flow. There's various edge cases with importing files into your translation list in the database at the time. So you have to make sure that which source of truth you know takes over, and so there are various different features during your import that you can use to avoid issues with one source being out of date compared to the other. So um, yeah, definitely. I think the point is that you want to be able to import what you already have, start with what you already have, and be able to go from there. What this tool really does after the fact of you getting it imported is that um, now you can probably expose this to someone who's translating this, and now basically you're just going to now they can see all the translations that are um, untranslated. That's an easy thing to miss if you're running a file-based approach. It's like, oh yeah, I looked through the en file, the English file, but oh, I didn't look through this other file, and I didn't notice that this key was missing. So this provides you've got a UI where you can easily see, okay, which translations have been missed, what do we need to fill in. You can use Google Translate, which could probably be adopted to other things. Like I saw a cool thing for Chat GPT for translations this week, and thought that was interesting. But so you could hook it up with various different backends, but it's just basically right now it's with Google Translate, which obviously serves the job. And so yeah, product folks can manage it through the UI on their end, or they can do it through Google Translate. And so once you have all your translations filled in and you're happy with everything, you can export back to YAML, JSON. Um, you can even export to CSV, which is of limited usefulness. But basically, yeah, so you have a whole workflow: import, export, and UI management um, to keep you running. So I think that's all the tools you need.
Yeah, that's awesome. That Google Translate is super helpful. Is it possible to mass translate for a particular language using it?
Yeah, basically you can filter down any list and based on the app name, the keys, variety of filters, and yeah, you can translate them all in batch. Basically, the functionality is that it will translate whatever's missing. So if you have something that's already filled in, it's not going to try and translate that because that's wasted effort. It's only going to translate whatever's missing and fill those in, uh, and then you can go from there. So yeah, that's the big thing. Be able to do it all in batch, quickly and easily. It's very helpful.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So in the situation around this sort of stuff is like, well, prior to this gem being created, is that it's it hasn't been a good situation. So like, yeah, like I was saying earlier, it's like, oh, I'm just going to add I18 to my project, add translations, all as well. Yeah. So now you've got to build a UI for it, and it's like somebody else hasn't done this before. What? Like how many people have done this over time? Why isn't there just like we're so good at gemifying everything in the Ruby world. Why hasn't somebody done this? Like how many people need to do this? You're solving the problem of doing things over and over and over again. And so that's perfect. Uh, so basically, I guess there was one existing project that sort of matched it similarly, which would be the Tolk project, TOLK. Um, and so that project is actually was the closest thing that I had found similar to what I envisioned here. And the problem with Tolk was that it's got about 580 stars. It looks like here, so pretty popular. But it hadn't seen some activity in quite some time. A lot of the popularity comes from older versions of Rails. I guess there was a particular point in time when it was very popular. However, I went through and I was, you expect a project with 580 stars. Hopefully, you could just, flash it up and get it running. Well, didn't seem to be the case. It seemed to be broken all over for me. I don't know how other people were managing, but it was unusable for me. And and so I went through. I was like, well, I'll just fix this popular repository up and push up a PR and we'll get things running. Get things in a better state. I don't like to see things die. I like to keep a project going if it's a good project. And so I started out small, try and just fix what I needed. And things snowballed and snowballed, ended up with this giant PR, trying to just get the project in a decent state. Because by the time I got through it all, I was like, this project is just in rough shape. So I sort of overhauled it for what I did. I dropped my PR and I said, here's what I got done. Could appreciate a little bit of help on the last little stretch here, struggling, but like I've really sunk a lot of time into this. I'm hoping to share with people, and kind of just got struck down. It's like, oh well, we don't, lack of priority and whatever. So I was like, well, I've sunk too much time into this project to continue any further. There's and what do I get out of it? It still has all its legacy things going on. So all the different decisions they made in the past, it still hangs on to all those. So there are, let's say it was 80% of what I'm looking for. The other 20% adds confusion and complexity to people. And so that's one way I thought it could be better. So other translation implementations, you'll see a lot of things like, and same with Tolk, you'll see a lot of things like there's a whole bunch of different rake tasks that you need to run to keep everything in synchronization. And so like the idea of having to do that on the command line just is like, you got to go do it all in the right order, this step first, and remember, hopefully your cookbook's all written up right. So I don't like to have that rake task approach. It's just it seems too error prone. So basically, try to do away with rake tasks and that sort of stuff. Yeah, the idea of this is to make it simple, something that you can, yeah, continue to do, and something that hopefully maybe a non-developer could maybe get away with updating the translations or something like that, like it's possible in this scenario, whereas with rake tasks, I don't think so. um so yeah, the situation in the ecosystem definitely wanted to be better, so it was a shame that it couldn't revive that popular old project, but um it's fine. We can have new things. Old things do die sometimes. So, I mean, hopefully they can get that up to snuff. I think I saw a recent PR that they had a Rails 7 support to it, and I was like, that's weird. I thought the project didn't really work, but okay. So it's interesting to see how that shakes out. I'm yeah, it's I don't like to see projects die like Tolk. It's got a huge legacy, very popular. It's a shame for me to see that stuff. Uh, I've picked up a variety of open source projects just from seeing them. Okay, they're in disarray. There's too many open issues. That can be a common one. Too many open issues, and it just sort of drowns itself. So you can help out open source in that way, or you just see that the maintainers just sort of walked away and is just not accepting PRs, not doing the things they need to do to keep the project up to snuff. And so in those scenarios, I've just reached out. Okay, so you probably curate a bunch of issues to help out a particular project. That's one easy way to get started and build some street creds with the maintainer so that he trusts you. And then and hopefully you can do some contributions as well with the PRs. Ideally, you don't just want to be doing issues. But between the two of those things, contributions and stuff, then once you get you once you become the expert in the field, you now can reach out to the maintainer. I've chased down their email addresses out of the commit messages and send them an email. You're like, hey, I see you abandoned this project. Like I'd really love to see it go forward. I'd be happy to help maintain it and stuff. And so I've done that at least two notable times, probably three times with different maintainers. So, and I'm now the main maintainer, if you will, core maintainer, if you will. So, yeah, it has been something that's worked. So I manage the RODF gem. That's for developing ODS spreadsheets in Ruby. So basically, somebody had written an awesome spec and then sort of walked away, and I was so happy that with the work he had done, that I wanted to pick up the maintenance. And so I like to leave, even if they've abandoned the project. Sometimes the maintainer will suggest, well, why don't we transfer it into your name or something like that? Transfer the repo in your name. I'm like, no, 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 that's not cool. I like to leave it in the original owner's name. Just like chances are they put in like tons of lines of code. The initial stuff is usually so big, and so whatever happens after that is like easy, if you will. So I want to give them the cred. I like to let them have the creds for that. Um, but then even over time, they'll just say, no, no, you need to have it. We will transfer it. It's like, okay, fine. But I do like trying to leave it in the original maintainer's name. But yeah, that's a fun one. RODF. Another big one that I picked up was that's from Spreadsheet Architect. Basically, there's a few dependent gems for Spreadsheet Architect, and RODF is one for dealing with the ODS spreadsheets. ODS is a format that's popular, I think, in Europe. But another gem that I picked up from that was a gem called AXLSX. That's a mouthful. AXLSX Styler. And basically that gem just allows you to add, or used to allow you to add styles to your Excel spreadsheet after you've already added the rows. And so it give you this nice sort of workflow, like CSS style, where you could just do it after, and that's cool. And that gem was really, really helpful for AXLSS in general. Like it recently, actually, we merged that into CA. There's a community version of AXLSX called CAL. I don't even want to keep saying this. CALSX. But yeah, we actually merged that gem up to core, and so now it's actually in the project itself, and it's now the legacy just lives on just as a gem page that's no longer used, hopefully, anymore. So those both of those projects were, yeah, just reaching out to the maintainer over email and just saying, hey, I'd love to carry this forward, and they've been ecstatic from both sides about the work they've been doing. So I would say that to other people as well. Like it's if you see a project rotting and it's cool, chances are like try and go the extra mile and get that thing maintained again. Try and you could be that guy if you need to be, like, so reach out and do those things. It could just be little things like opening issue or creating issue management. Like I've done that for other projects. Like it could be a domain you're not familiar with. Let's say I worked with Cordova apps for a while there, and you only have so much knowledge into the native Android or iOS, and so the problem with that ecosystem is it deals with web, which is JavaScript, and then you've got Android and iOS, and so it runs people pretty thin. People aren't usually experts in all three. Chances are they're just an expert in JavaScript or just an expert in iOS, and so the problem with those repositories is simply people are creating issues, bug reports and stuff, and the quantity that comes in versus the people who offer to maintain it is just totally out of balance. And so certain repositories, just to keep them alive, you'll need to just curate the issues, close things down every so often, try to identify duplicates, a lot of issue management. And that, if you don't do that, the project can just fall away and be unconsiderable. Like if someone was to look at it, they'll be like, oh, I wouldn't use that, it looks like it's in poor state. So that can be one way to revive life to projects. That's happened on a few different occasions for a few different projects. I worked with Chameleon CMS when I was trying to figure out how to make a good CMS solution back in the day, which never worked out. But I worked a lot with issues and just like didn't really work a lot with the code in that code base, but I worked a lot on their image, marketing, website, issues, and I felt like I brought that project back from the dead. It made it considerable again to people. Now you can look at it and say, okay, I might use this. There's not 1,000 opened issues, right? Like there's some hope here. But
that's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't know if I would use Chameleon CMS. It's like the most un-Ruby thing I've ever experienced.
It's such a crowded space, CMS in general, right? Like
I tried to build my own, and time lost. I don't know if you call it that.
I mean,
brain cycle used.
That's kind of my default trying out a new Rails project or new feature, right? Like I'll just create a CMS, right? Like if I'm like, oh hey, what's new in like Rails 7? Like let me spin up a new Rails app and start making pages, I guess. Like right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah,
it's different every time, a little bit, you know. And you're like,
yeah,
oh, I shouldn't do that because I know eventually I'll get down a rabbit hole doing, XYZ with it. Uh,
yeah. I worked a lot with these different CMS maintainers and stuff, and I got pretty deep into a bunch of them. Like Locomotive CMS was seeming pretty attractive to
oh
me, and
yeah,
then I got you get pretty deep into these, like you're invested. You've already got your project. You're like, I'm going for this. I'm going to finish this project, and then you get hung up by the CMS is simply incapable of doing the next phase of things that you need to do, and you're not even that not even at the end game yet. And so I start creating all these issues. It's like, how do we do this? How do we do that? How
right.
do we do this? And like, trying to be real detailed and like, I'm happy to open PRs, no problem. But it's like my head was just hurting, and then these there's no solution. Those issues will still be open today because yeah, it's an infinite issue. You solve one problem, you've built another problem with
Yeah.
CMSs. That's how
I
it works.
mean, that's kind of a good analogy of like open source in general, right? Like where you've made this thing and like, okay, lots of people start using it, gets a community, and then like you hit these limitations where, okay, well, the way it's built, like doesn't really fit in this feature that's like lots of people are starting to request. And then you're like, well, now I want it, right? Like, well, do we start looking at something else? Like, do we try and like rewrite this thing, right? And
Yeah,
it's a tricky balancing act for sure, right? Like it just reminds me of Mike Perham's like focus on the very niche thing, like specific, and be as small as you can, and then just like add
yeah,
on other things to it, right? So I try and think
yeah,
think about that, but like when you're just having fun and like doing like that's the problem with open source, like it's people's fun time, right? So like when you get to the point where like you need to start depending it for the non-fun time, like it starts to like
yeah,
the lines start blurring, right?
yeah. No, I know.
But
Yeah,
that's
I,
awesome
I do.
that you go and like curate issues and stuff. That's one thing I'm terrible at with all my open source projects. I'm
Yeah,
getting better, but like, yeah, when I go to other projects, I'll go and look at the issues and be like, you know, I'll be getting to some of the older ones and be like, I don't think this makes sense anymore, and just leave a comment, right? Like, hey, should we close this? Like, seems like it's not, and sometimes it'll get closed, right?
yeah,
Because a lot of times you go and you'll see like, okay, this one has like 200 issues, and like really it's 200 issues, and like 90% of them are from like 2 or more years ago, and you're like, do those
exactly.
really
Yeah,
count, right? Like,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Sometimes you have to commit bankruptcy for those old stuff. It's like, what
yeah.
what is this offering anybody? Nothing. It's just like we have to do something, and I can't look at each issue, so we're just going to close them all, and hopefully you reopen something if it's a big deal. I don't
Yeah,
like doing that when that happens, but like in certain circumstances, that's useful.
I remember listening to Jose Valim talk about how he like manages his, because at the one point he just had like so many open source projects that he was like literally burning out from just like managing all the ones that he had, and he like made this like strict thing where it was like just quick to close, right? Like, okay, if somebody is really like has an issue with it, like they'll reopen it with why they think it should be a valid issue, right? And so like I took that to heart, right? Like a lot of people do, they just make an issue they for logging, right? Like, okay, like this is an issue, this is what I experienced, and sometimes it's not really worth pursuing uh a, not even a fix, but like maybe it's like a feature or something else, and you just end up with these things where, okay, like as a maintainer the issue stays open because you want to be considerate to the person that opened it, and also expose it to other people that may submit the same thing. But at the same time, you don't want to have an open issue that you're not going to fix anyway, and you're like waiting for community feedback that just never comes, right? And so like, do you auto expire issues then after a certain time? I'm curious, like, what's your method for like managing the insanity?
I guess I don't like auto expiring, especially when they're for like very short times. I've seen things like 10 days or less, and I'm not a fan of that because then it leads to a super clean backlog, that's well, everything's fine. um, no, so I think that there's no replacement for human eyes there. I mean, these things only become a problem when you neglect them. So, um, even if you have neglected them, let's say you have, it's a one-time cost, or maybe two times cost, but one-time cost to just to go through the issues and close them all. So like it's painful then, but future you is going to be so happy. You're going to be so free and light. Um, so I, and when you look at some of this old stuff, you go, oh wow, we didn't do this, or like, I thought we already did that feature, or like this is totally should be fixed. Like you'll come across some stuff, you'll be like, oh my gosh, this is gold mine of useful stuff, and then a lot of it'll just be crud that you're closing. But to find those little pieces and bits can really help tie up a lot of loose ends. I find it to be useful. So you get something out of it, and future you benefits.
Yeah, for sure. I could see that. Uh, it it makes me wonder, like, I know that there's like okay, this is unmaintained. You add some slogan to your repo. I've checked
Yeah,
out. I wonder if
yeah,
there's a more elegant solution to that, right? Like, where
yeah,
you can flag it. Okay, this project, it is not going to be worked on anymore. If you're interested, submit it here, and it would just like start a ranking, and then you could just click, okay, like this guy looks good,
yeah.
or girl, right?
Yeah, no,
Like,
exactly. I mean, you do have to give up on those projects, though. I had to do that earlier this year already. One project, I made a form builder gem, and started sinking a ton of time into it, and I was starting to get stressed out on my on my personal time, and it's like staying up really late and still not finishing the project. So like I just had to. I was like, you got to cut this off for your own sanity. Um, there are things that are worth maintaining. Like all the other projects that I do, I'm happy to maintain those, but this particular one seems like it's going to wreck my life a little bit, if you will. So like I had to shut it down and say no, no more. I'm not gonna even think about this anymore, because I have to throw away that idea because it's too much work, right?
right,
And so you got to be able to do that. Otherwise, yeah, you can, depending on how you're into open source for what you're into it for. But some people, it's a bit of an addiction or whatever. You're scratching an itch, right? And so, to me, I think it is that. Like, I'll go through, probably the winter times is probably the worst. So you get bored in the winter, and you're like, I gotta build something. I just have to build something. And so you start doing this open source, and yeah, if you end up with too many projects, and yeah, you don't want to end up maintaining stuff just because you like to finish things, and you don't want to just, yeah, I don't like to have undone things. So uh,
right.
yeah, you just got to be able to say no, that's enough, shutting this down.
Yeah, when I first saw this Rails, translation manager, it made me think of Thoughtbot's old copycopter. I don't know if you're familiar, but it was basically like a very generic like text management server that you can then query against. So they had like two parts, like a copy server and then the client, where it would just use the translations to like pull some other server for that data, right? Like,
Okay.
uh, and it reminded me of that, but like they abandoned that. And Thoughtbot's a pretty like big consultancy company, especially in the Rails community.
Yeah.
uh and when I saw, they were like, yeah, we're not really interested in managing this anymore. And I just thought, man, like, okay, like anything could evaporate, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's the
Yeah.
wild west of the open source world.
Yeah. That's a big one. A lot of Thoughtbot stuff has gone uh, unmaintained over the years. I mean, whatever, they shifted directions or whatever, but
Yeah, but I mean, it just goes, it's not necessarily against the norm, right? Like it's not just personal projects. It's like also bigger companies too, right? Like eventually
Mhm.
the need dries up and they don't have a need for the product, or
Yeah,
maybe there's other better alternatives that come up, and then they just abandon them, right? And so it's hard to like uh I guess for me it's hard to know when to quit. I
it
I
is.
just I have them open, just like projects that I have just open all the time. Or sometimes I'll be like, oh, this looks like an interesting project, and I'll start to like get involved, and then I just stop. I'm
Yeah,
sorry. My mind just like wanders too much, I think. And I'm wondering if
yeah.
like maybe that's just like how it happens, right? Like things just organically like move directions in the open source world, and maybe that's a good thing, right?
Passion, yeah, passions change.
Passions
Yeah.
change.
What once was. No, it's you did say something about that earlier. You said there's something about making your idea, what was it? It was small and niche, I think, and that is something to be said. Like that's a key part of this particular Rails I18 manager, is that like it's limited in scope. I don't want it to get super complicated, where you've got all these different pieces that have to work nicely together. So it should just be a very simple solution, very focused, and not a lot of extra fluff. And those are the most maintainable projects um, across the board. Yeah, once you start to add too much, or you decide to add this feature, and then you have to live with that legacy of adding that feature after the fact. And sometimes the legacy of adding that feature is just maintenance burden. And so it's you just working on this feature just because if somebody happened to mention, or you happen to think it was a good idea, and now you're just working on it and nobody's going to even use it after. And so
Yeah.
you have to like opt out of some of those maintenance burdens and just say, no, there's a simpler way. What if we don't have all these bells and whistles, and we just solve the problem in a simple way?
Yeah, we're kind of seeing that come out from like I would say Rails as a, framework kind of firming up, right? Like it's matured, it's not really changing that much, right? Like some newer features come in, but for the most part, like a lot of the active record stuff is kind of the same, right? Like it hasn't really changed too much. And if you were,
Yeah,
a Rails developer 10, 15 years ago, you're seeing very similar, like, structure to how it works, right? And so I
yeah,
think we're starting to see a lot of like these newer, very niche things that are just plug in and drop in using, right? Where
yeah,
like you have here, where it's like, okay, use it for this purpose and it's going to work great, right? And I think you're
yeah.
right. I think having a very, you know adding too much can definitely like kind of be the downfall of like that onslaught of issues, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. No, it's definitely interesting. And a cool thing about this project, actually, now that I think about it, is that I implemented it using Rails engine. So not that useful to a lot of people, but like it's just another web server that you got to manage and run, and like that's a headache, like that's the show that could be a showstopper to, let's say, why Copycopter is not running it. They're not running it anymore. Somebody wanted to stop running the thing. And
Right.
so this Rails engine approach allows you to, let's say you already have an app running, or and you just, so you drop it into this, and oh, it's already running on that app, and now I'm still just maintaining the one app. Cool. Like no extra maintenance burden, really, and or you can just have, let's say you have like all these services, you have 7 different services running in one Rails app. You just keep plugging in a new Rails engine every time, and all is well. It's not super important functionality. It doesn't need to be isolated. It's just, it serves its purpose, and let's not make it a maintenance headache. So I kind of been liking that approach. A lot of the stuff in the past has been like, we're just working on gems. You just add a gem and you use the Ruby code. It's not like a full UI, like a Rails app, if you will. And so I'm having fun with these Rails engines, because you can limit it in scope like a gem, but yet now you're able to explore new ideas that are just beyond the scope of what you can do in gems. You're able to take it to a higher level, a higher abstraction, and I'm quite enjoying that. I think that's sort of been my most recent evolution, is what's next for open source for me, and I've been enjoying these Rails engines as a unique way of expressing yourself. So yeah, that's
Yeah,
been
that's
fun.
awesome. You know, Rails engines are definitely like one of the most underutilized things, I would say, in Rails, right? Because you
Yeah,
just plug them in and then they just magically work with your app, right?
yeah,
And they can be completely separate in their own external, repo even, and it's
yeah.
great. Um, so what's your experience been like building that and like maintaining the engine over a longer period of time? Like, is it pretty straightforward? Like once you have like kind of the nuts and bolts like locked in, is it pretty like straightforward as far as like updating with the latest Rails versions and stuff?
Yeah, there's I guess there's a few different things to keep in mind, but it's pretty straightforward. One of the things, if you're like expecting to modularize your system, like not in a gem-based approach or something, like, and you want to like start accessing stuff from other engines and talking between the two, you're probably going to run into some troubles and headaches. I think there's blog articles written about people going that route and then coming back and that sort of thing. But so I wouldn't highly recommend that. Try to keep it siloed more, if you will. You'll see good examples of that, like Sidekick has its web interface. All these things, they're just siloed interfaces, and that's quite helpful. The other aspect, I guess, is there's a few different interesting configurations you need to set up. Whether you need how you want your migrations to behave. You can make them like silent in the background, or you can make it as an actual like bundle install step that people have to do. Assets is a big one. That's kind of a troubling situation for Rails engines, because Sprockets is no longer like available in all scenarios. Because of that, which is a shame, because it was our one solution that makes everything just work TM, right? And now that we don't have that, you're like, oh, well, I have to support all users. So now you can't use the asset pipeline if you want to support all people.
So
And
what is
so
that
that
process?
the thing that I've settled upon is just storing your assets publicly and using
Copying them,
CDNs where you can. So just put them in the public. So that means you just got plain CSS, no more Sass. Uh, that's a shame. That's
that
actually
is a
hard to live
shame.
with, but but and that's frustrating if you want to do Sass customizations, like let's say Bootstrap wants you can change colors and this and that, and without
Right.
Sass, you're like, how do we do that? It's kind of a problem. Um,
Well, to be
so
honest,
that's
CSS should support it out of the box.
they have those CSS variables, but
Yeah.
somehow it comes back. It's like, oh yeah, we mostly support CSS, but then oh yeah, you need Sass for this.
Right,
Like, oh,
right. I know. Yeah, the
annoying
third
again.
parties really bite you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and Sass also is not in the same scenario either. You can't just add that as a dependency to the Rails engine. It's the whole situation. Use the old version or the new version. I think a lot
Right.
of us are still using the old version. um, but yeah, so that's the main paradigms you have to get used to, I guess, is that asset management. You have to sort of architect your setup in a way that's going to work for you. And so just pay a little attention to that. But yeah, once you set it up and get it running, then it's all easy. The only noticeable thing is everything's namespaced under your name, which can be annoying, or something to get used to. But
Right.
that's the only difference. Other than that, I think it's a great experience. The problem is Which is interesting. They Rails engines was built years ago, right? Like, and they basically haven't been touched as far as I can tell. Like, I don't know if they've been touched since then. Like, it's just been sitting, and it's kind of like an amazing technical feat that it stood the test of time like that. But the documentation is pretty poor. Like, you kind of have to find things out in the wild. So I mean, Rails has that problem in general. The documentation just it's too difficult to get stuff through the documentation, the PR gate sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a shame. Yeah, like we should just be documenting more rather than being so correct. Um,
Right.
but but whatever, it's the world we live in. But so there's some documentation issues, and you'll find out some different hacks and stuff just from looking at other Rails engines. That's one of the things you need to do if you're going to get into that world. Just you need to see what other people are doing. Otherwise, you just won't know how to do certain things, or you won't know what's possible. And I think your mileage would vary if you were to ask these questions on Stack Overflow or Reddit or something, or wherever your place is. I think your mileage would vary as to, like, you might not get an answer to the question you're talking about. So like, it's not super commonly treaded ground because of that reason. Like I said, it might not be great for modularization or those other purposes. And since it's not useful for that, it's more on a gem level oftentimes.
Right.
Yeah.
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 I know, like, a lot of people like to use engines even internally to help move apps out of a giant monolith, right? But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, there are so many limitations,
Mm-hmm.
with anytime you need data sharing. I feel like that's definitely the
Yeah.
cross app
Yeah.
communication barrier is always just like never a fun thing to play with.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
it's not fun. Yeah. The monolith is a beautiful thing.
It really is. The
You
more you
will
break out,
enjoy life.
yeah.
You will enjoy life, you know? Yeah, and you notice what you had as you break out. Yeah,
Right, I
So
know. You're like, "Oh, wait, how do I get this thing, into that new app now?"
yeah,
Uh,
exactly. Months later.
yeah, months later. Months later. It's already happened, you know?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
funny.
No, for
It's
sure.
it's
So
like when tests fail on a leap year or something, right? Like, you're like, "Oh, I forgot about that
yeah,
case." Like,
yeah, yeah. No, we have a running Slack channel for time fun,
time
where
fun.
we like to just yeah, we one of the recent ones that just came up was a spec that had a really funny name for about the time. And yeah, we were all chuckling about it. So I'm glad you mentioned that. It's relevant to my week.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. Time's fun to joke about because it just melts your brain, and
Oh, it does.
it's
Oh my gosh, especially like yeah, I mean, especially in the States, right, where we have you know, the daylight savings time. It really, like, we're
yeah,
the only ones, and like
yeah,
you deal
yeah,
with any other country and they're just like, why is it an hour less again? Wait,
yeah,
what month is it? Like,
yeah. I know exactly.
oh my gosh.
Your microwave and your fridge, they don't agree.
No. Well, thank you, Weston, for coming on and for this, translation manager. I'm definitely going to use this going forward for translations. Looks super
Yeah,
simple, and yeah, I hope you get help so that it stays up.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, exactly. We could continue to grow it as a community, but like I said, we got to keep it minimal in scope so that we don't hate our lives later.
Right.
So I'm hoping this could be the de facto standard to sort of carry I18 forward. I don't know how, not every app does need I18, which is the interesting thing that a lot of people don't
Right.
think about. When you first start out, you're like, of course I need it translated in every language. But you can actually avoid translations in the English world that we have
Right.
online. So um, but for the situations you can't, this gem will be there to save the day. And I'm hoping it can just be that solution to just get people rolling. And like I say, they might replace it way later on, years down the road, but at that point they'll know why and what they want to do,
Yep.
rather than just when you're starting off. I just want to reduce barriers, and so I think this can help. I think it'll stick around.
It seems like it. You keep it small, and you never know.
Yeah, yeah. It's been
Well,
a real pleasure with you, talking with you, Valentino.
yeah. So at the end of the show, we always like to kind of give something that we're really excited working on or interested in, or even just we called it picks before, but I feel like it's transitioning. So anything at all you want to share, now's your chance.
That's been my current passionate project. I guess it's summertime, and the next one hopefully doesn't come until after summer, but patiently waiting the next big idea, or small idea, I should say. Then that I'll have something to work on again. That should be exciting. For now, I'm just staying busy with working on my 4x4s and working on engines and mechanicals. It's pain.
I don't envy that.
No. Well, it's
It
fun.
is fun. It is fun.
Same realm as open source. You tell yourself this is going to be fun.
Right.
Sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't.
Oh, that's funny. Well, on topic here, and you did briefly mention it while we were talking, but the guy from I don't know if he's still at HashiCorp, but Obi Fernandez, he has this instant I18n gem that does instant
Right.
translations based on your translation file. Super cool project.
Yeah. That's the
So
one I commented on.
yeah, I would totally try this in combination with your app and see, how it works out.
Yeah, I'm hoping to maybe do something with that. I'll admit I'm not wanting to propagate AI. I'm not wanting to propagate it. But however, I thought that this was a like perfectly well suited solution. Like there's a comment that said this is a very well suited solution to LLMs, and I just happen to agree. It's just dealing with words, and so I feel like this is a perfect use for it. And that would add some popularity to the project, probably give it some hype.
Right.
But yeah, that gem would be cool to integrate with it. But I already proposed to him that he's building out a bigger solution, and he hasn't scoped the gem down to a very small niche thing. And so I'm trying to tell him, hey, you have a very awesome small niche thing here.
Right.
Separate that and then build your thing on top of it and build a bigger gem to do all the other fancy stuff that you want to do, because a lot of people are going to not be able to do that. And so if he doesn't do that, it'll be a shame, because then somebody else has to make the gem that he already made and gets to take the glory.
Right.
Or they have to copy the source verbatim and put it into theirs, just the small bit they need. So I'm hoping to try to encourage him to do that, so that he can have the fame, right? That's what,
right.
I mean. Don't want to do that to a guy, but if they don't want to take the glory for themselves, then what can you do? So yeah, that's where I'm hoping that goes. But yeah, that could be that's probably an obvious next step for this,
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's fun. I agree with you. Maybe it's overhyped, all this, large language model talk, but it's just it's just a toy at this point, right?
Yeah.
So
no, I know.
Have fun with it while it lasts,
Yeah. The technical stuff is fun. I just don't. What AI might do to our world on the human level is the issue. But I'm happy for the technological things that we can do with it today.
Well, Weston, thanks for coming on. It was great talking to you, and I hope everything goes smooth with your projects. And until next time, folks. Valentino out.